Good afternoon. Welcome to you all. On behalf of UNISCAPE, I am UNISCAPE Director Tessa Matteini, and we are very pleased today to start with our lecture series, so Where Discipline Meets. And we are particularly glad to have here as first lecturer Bas Pedroli, who is a very important person for UNISCAPE. And I would like to thank Bas for his contribution. I'm sure that it will be particularly promising. And also I would like to thank Connor Newman and Verle van het Velde for their important work in building this series of seminars. For us, for UNISCAPE, it's very important to create this sequence of meeting, also having the impossibility to meet in person, but creating a series of occasion to opportunity to feel the network. And I think we can start. I would like to thank you all for participating in this first lecture. And so I leave the floor to Connor Newman, who will introduce you the series of lecture which UNISCAPE has prepared for the 2021. So Connor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Tessa, and hello to everybody. You're all very welcome. We're really glad to see you here. And I want to give a shout out to Bas and to Maura, who is going to be the respondent. The idea for the series came about really as a consequence of the COVID-19 and the impact it had on our ability to actually run a conference in the middle of October of 2020 to mark the 20th anniversary of the signing of the European Landscape Convention in Florence. And now that plan had to be abandoned. And so we thought, as a way of solving it, we would push the conference forward by a year. And that we would use the intervening year to do a series of events, and this is one of them, this series of lectures. So we put a call out and we got a very good response, and so we selected the papers that we have here. The network, UNISCAPE network, for anyone who's here who isn't part of the network itself, it's a very important initiative of universities coming together to collaborate in teaching, research and advocacy, really, on behalf of the idea of landscape as being such a vital component of our European identity, of our futures, of our economies, our culture, and so on. All themes that I know that Bas is going to be referring to here. But it is, after all, a network of universities, and research, of course, is a primary concern in universities, but so also is teaching. So the idea in the series here was to combine both and to make available to people using the internet, as we've now become much more accustomed to that as a result of our experiences over the last 9 months, to use the digital platform to open out the scholarship that is available across the 55 or so universities across Europe to the membership. So that's what we're going to do. Now, typically, we're starting today, is it going to be a little bit different from the next or following lectures in the series, because we have these preliminaries to do. But the series is of lectures approximately every month apart. We've tried to make sure that they always occur on a Tuesday, so that should make life a little easier for people to try to remember when they're going to be. And I'm not going to go through the full program. It's available to you on the website, so you can see it. But just to give you kind of an idea of where we're going, we'll introduce shortly the lecture of this evening. The next one that we're actually going to be mounting on the 2nd of February, in fact, is a former graduate of my own university here at the University of Galway, Claire Nolan, who has a paper on landscape as a common good, but she's looking particularly through the prism of well-being and human well-being and the historic environment. That's followed by a paper by Margherita Chisani on landscape and the new mobility paradigm. So again, the idea is to bring new research to you. So we have focused as well in our selection process on trying to get a little bit of diversity across the program to make sure that people get a strong sense of the range of research that's being carried out, the range of interest there are, and in fact, I suppose the multidisciplinary platform that Landscape is. And that's where we get the name for the program, where the disciplines meet. So Landscape is where the disciplines meet. The format is going to be as follows. We've asked the speakers to maybe start the talk off with something a bit more creative than is normally the case. And so Bas is going to start with a video shortly and then segue from the video into his talk. But I want to just tell you a little bit about what we're going to do. So I'm going to introduce you now in a moment to Maura Farrell, who is the respondent. I'll explain the role of Maura. And the idea is that Bas will speak for 45 minutes or so, followed by questions and answers. But the questions and answers will be teed up by our respondent, Dr. Maura Farrell, who is actually a colleague of mine here in NUI Galway, who works in the area of rural and agricultural geography and on the processes of social, cultural and economic change in the rural environment. She co-directs the National Rural Network here in Ireland, which is a bridgehead to the European Network for Rural Development. And she's worked on and led a number of both national and international research programs. At the moment is working on an EU Horizon 2020 program that goes by the name of Ruralization, which I suppose is the equivalent of urbanization, but for the rural environment. So I think a lot of the intentions of ruralization and of the work that Maura has done over the years is very closely harmonious with what Bas is going to be talking about, and consequently that will make a good bridge over to the discussion itself. So we'd ask you to keep your microphones off during the course of the lecture. Some of you will turn your cameras off as well. It's up to you. It depends on the nature of your coverage. And you can go to the conversation part of Zoom here and type in your comments and questions. You can do that as we go along. That can be useful too. And at the end of the session, I'll go through those. And then if the conversations, rather than have one person talking and the other typing, we'll invite people to open up their microphones as well, if that seems to be more acceptable. So those are generally what we're going to be doing over the next few minutes. And I'm now going to hand you over to Verla, who is going to introduce you to Bas. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Conor. When I was thinking how to introduce Bas, I thought, well, maybe we don't need to introduce you, Bas, because I think a lot of people will know you. And I also don't even remember when we met, in a way, because you always have been there or are still around in the international kind of network. So in Dutch, we would say you are like een vaste waarde, a fixed value, literally translated in a lot of the international activities, and especially also for UNISCAPE. For those who don't know Bas, Bas has been working in Wageningen, in the research institute and also linked with Wageningen University, and in the land use planning group as associate professor. And he has a PhD in physical geography and landscape ecology. And I think, Bas, a lot of people will know you from the many projects you have been coordinating along the road, but also about the let's say fundamental work you have been doing or still doing in the framework of the Landscape Convention, and that also links with UNISCAPE, because I think Conor was referring to landscape as a vital component of our life, but I think Bas is probably a vital component of UNISCAPE. So I think a lot of the things that are happening now are still thanks to you. Bas has been the previous director of UNISCAPE, so Tessa took it over a couple of years ago. I don't really remember when, but it's not only UNISCAPE. He also is involved in Petrarca, in Landscape Europe, in Yale. And so I think in that way, we can see you as a key figure in landscape research in Europe. And somehow I think it's also very, it seemed to be very obvious to have you here in the lecture series. And it's not that I would like to put the level kind of with a high demand, but I think it's very nice also to have you as the first one and to have you as the kickoff lecture. And I hope you will give a lot of inspiration also for the other people, how we kind of want to continue with this lecture series. So the first thing we ask to Bas is to show a little movie, a little kind of YouTube clip that is connected with the presentation. So Bas, I think you can show it yourself and then also make the link with the talk. And then after the talk, we move on to the discussion. So,
okay, yeah. I'll do.
Yes. Now, like Connor was saying, you can play the game or the show.
Let's play the game.
If we do have to hear the sound of the movie, Bas, maybe you have to...
You don't hear the sound?
No.
Well, the sound is on, but...
Maybe it is the sound of your computer itself. So the volume.
Is it better now?
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay. This is the mayor, and he says, well, we make the world a little bit more slow. Is there any sound now for you?
No.
Okay. I will. This was a meeting of Cheetah Slow, which is an international movement, and it was a milestone for the mayor of this small community, which is located exactly between Rotterdam and The Hague. So it's within a metropolitan area, high-rise buildings, but this area is really like a sort of open area, a park within the metropolis. At least you can now read something. We encourage people to have local products, local farmers, not building everywhere, leaving some space for recreation and tourism and quality of life, in short. The local resident leaves hot water for coffee and tea early in the morning. It's just a small area for municipalities. So I will stop sharing now. But I need to stop it really. Oh God, yeah. So, and finally share my presentation. I share. Right, there it is.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Vele, for your introduction. It's too much of credit for me. What I hope that I can share with you is a sort of enthusiasm for the European landscape, because the European Landscape Convention, that is the reason that we organize this series, the series where the disciplines meet. The title of my presentation is Europe, the Continent of Cheese, for how long? And I will explain why I think Europe is a continent of cheese. And I will also discuss with you for how long this may be and what alternative futures we might imagine. Now I must see whether I can. Yes. Because landscape is really at a crossroads at the moment. The European Landscape Convention says landscape is an area as perceived by people, but how many people do really connect with the landscape still, except maybe for when they are on holiday? In fact, landscape does not unify always. Well, it very often divides. That's at least what Bruno Latour said in 2012. It divides because, well, you're always discussing about the future of your landscape, because your landscape is also the landscape of your neighbor. Conflict management, therefore, is at the core of landscape planning. Landscape governance can only be based on facilitation and not on regulation. And that's why it is good that we have a European Landscape Convention, which is not a part of the European Commission and the European Union legislation, because then it would be regulated, and then, well, the essence of the landscape would be lost. The power of the individual, that is basic. And the power of the individual is based on personal rights and personal responsibilities, where Wilhelm Schmid said, well, it is the art of compromise. So going beyond the differences and the discussion, we have to develop this art of compromise. And a last point, the notion of common law is fundamental to landscape. We will talk about commons in the next presentation of this series. The common law is fundamental to landscape, really as opposite to the parliamentary law. But that is a statement of Roger Scruton, well, he recently passed away. The common law does not impose order, but grows from it. It grows from the landscape. Europe's cultural history is really at the basis of our landscape, or you could also say landscape is at the basis of Europe's cultural history. European landscapes represent profound and continuous cultural histories. Let me take some examples. The first example is the peatland reclamation in Holland. Well, that's exactly the area of which the YouTube film was about, which you couldn't hear, unfortunately. Well, just a little bit of this history. I will dwell upon this history a little bit. As from the 19th century, there were the first reclamation of peat bogs. Well, you can see the windmills here on the right. This area was under peat bog, so really 8-9 meters high, well, 1100 years ago. Then local drainage of the peatland started, and they started from the banks of the rivers and creeks. Slash and burn buckwheat growing was providing some food for the people, but this didn't last very long. Oxidation of the peat was the result, and therefore there was a lowering of the field level, a higher groundwater level, and again, need for extra drainage. The discharge of surplus water to the sea was first on a natural basis, like the gravity, and then through one-way locks at low tide, so that they could stop the high tide from coming inside. And from the 13th century, natural discharge was not sufficient anymore. So we needed to have construction of ring dikes and windmills. So the windmills that you're seeing here is not for grounding wheat or other purposes of working, but it was working the water. These were really pumping mills, pumping water out of what is then called polder. The polder is the area between the dikes that is kept dry. Early 14th century, there was the damming off of rivers. The river Amstel, for instance. And you now can notice that Amsterdam is in fact the dam on the river Amstel. So where the dam on the river Amstel was, Amsterdam developed. And the same applies for Rotterdam and for Zaandam and many, many other cities around this green heart of Holland. Gradually, there were lower and lower field levels, more intricate system of polders, each with their own democratically governed water board, the waterschap. Democratically organized because, well, they needed the cooperation between themselves to keep the whole area dry. And in the meantime, there was a city culture developing based on trade. Imports of wheat, well, because there was no wheat growing in this area, imports of wheat came from the cities, from the Baltics, for instance. And there was a strong development of specialized dairy practice in the lowland peat landscape. And that is why I said the continent of cheese, Gouda and Edam cheese in this area. But I will explain in a little bit, in some minutes also about other examples. So the development of this dairy farming system in the lowland of Holland made them prosper and made them also famous in the whole world for their cheese. In fact, you could say, well, the cows of the lowland Holland, they made the preconditions of the later development of the Dutch society in their trades. Also, lowland peat extracted for household fuel in the cities served there, and with a failing management of remaining peat strips, lakes developed because of wind erosion. So you see in the picture here the windmills. Here there is still peat available in the soil, but in many other places there's no peat anymore. And there were lakes that from the 16th century were subsequently drained with windmills in the droogmakerij, making dry. The green heart, you see it here on the map. On the left side, that's the area between Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, Utrecht. Well, in fact, a sort of metropolitan area of 7 million people with a huge park in the middle. And on the right, you see a picture of the Netherlands, where in darker green is the area that is below average sea level. So that is all areas which are polders now, which formerly were peat bogs, but now have to be drained, well, just continuously, in fact. Here you see a picture of the area where the film was from, of 1600, the year 1600. And you can see all the different polders, which each of them had a dike around them and had a windmill to pump it dry. And each of those polders had their own democratic organization to safeguard that the dikes were well maintained and the windmills were well maintained as well. In 1700, well, the map making was a little bit more sophisticated, but the same polders still existed. In 1850, 150 years later, well, you can see that still the same pattern of polders is available there. You see that the Delft on upper right, and it has developed as a conurbation, and well, there is at least a little bit visible already of the track of the train, which was not yet finished by then. And around 1900, it is still more or less the same. In 1950, you still can recognize all of those polders. Delft has grown. The Hague to the upper left has also grown. Schiedam near Rotterdam has also grown, but the area is still open and, well, not in use for urbanization. And where you see it, the year of 2000, well, the green space is really, really very small. And this is exactly the area where those people the Cheetah Slow movement, well, headed by the mayor of Schipluiden, of this small village in the middle, said, no, stop with building. We want what to value the landscape as it is, and we will want even to develop the values of the landscape for the future, and not for building big tourist hotels from tourists that want to spend a nice night and then go back to The Hague or Rotterdam during the day. They found out that, of course, well, the history of this area is important and still can be recognized in the landscape, where the normal people, the normal tourists would probably not recognize it. And then they decided, well, to recall the names of all those polders and try to develop a target landscape image and a target land use image of each of those polders. And this was done in a participative way. So the inhabitants of the area were asked to give their ideas and their opinions on how this could develop on the basis of the values of the cultural history in the past. And they were really very enthusiastic to participate in that, because they found that this reflected the history not only of their own family, but also of the village. And at the same time, it gave a new impetus to rural development, to tourism, local tourism, small-scale tourism with small-scale products, and to a future for their children. Another example, Alpine meadows. It is clear that in the Alpine meadows, well, it were the cows and it were the grazers that developed the landscape that we are now appreciating so much for holidays. Well, not maybe for the ski resorts, because they are damaging a lot those beautiful slopes. But in fact, well, the basis of the Alpine meadows and the farms up there are also the basis of the slow tourism in the Alps. And the cheese, well, like here, this daily affair of making cheese from the Alpine meadows, well, gives them a way of existence, gives them also a way of survival against, well, the big money that is being pumped into the ski resorts, where the local people don't see anything from back. But the cheese, that's the thing that they make themselves. That's the thing that they want to keep up and to develop towards a higher standard every time. Another example, Samiland. So in the north of Sweden and Norway and Finland and Russian Karelia, there's also, well, the local communities that used to graze the tundra with their reindeers. They have a sense of landscape which is completely different than the sense of landscape of maybe the Dutch or the Alpine people. But it is also a sense of landscape related to the land use of grazing. Once we were there for the European Landscape Convention, and the local people there, they thought, okay, we need to show something about cultural heritage. And they showed us this chapel. And they were very proud of it, or at least they did as if they were very proud. But when I asked one of the Sami people and said, well, but what is it? Are you a religious people from origin, or no? She said, no, not at all. But this is we thought this would be very important for you, because this is a church from the 17th century and it has been rebuilt, and then it burned, and then it was rebuilt again, and now it's a monument. So it's a landscape monument for you. So, but of course, well, the Sami, they didn't have any buildings. They only had tents, and the landscape was there where their tent was. So the landscape, well, the perception of those people, of the Sami people, was completely different, but that was embedded in the way they used their land. And the last example, the Alentejo in Portugal. You see here the montados, or in Spain it would be called dehesas. Well, the vast landscapes with a very low intensity of land use, where cork oak is grown, which can be harvested every 9 years, and where the cows are grazing on their own. Also here, it is an intricate system of land use, which is completely in harmony with the possibilities of the landscape. So Europe's cultural history is one of diversity. The landscape have been developed since prehistory, and it has been recorded in lots of caves far away from the daylight. And the diversity is grounded in an extreme biophysical diversity. Landscape-related identity is surviving to a large extent in languages, in local markets, in traditions, in local regulations, in communal legislation. So in all of our traditions, or in at least a lot of our traditions, you can see that there is an involvement in the landscape. There is a connection with the landscape. It cannot be without a reference to the landscape that you talk about the traditions of a local village. Agricultural communities had their associated settlement forms, and permanent grassland and the grazing livestock were unique features of the historical European rural landscape everywhere. And that's why I say Europe, it's the continent of cheese. Basis of the European landscape was the mixed family farm, vegetable garden and fruit trees, cropland around it, then grazing land and woodland, and always a cow, 2 cows, 5 cows, some goats or sheep, pigs, other small animals. That was what built our landscape. Often there was talk of transhumance. They brought their cattle and their animals to other places in summer than in winter because of the food situation. And there were often mixed cultures, like vines and olives, and under those olives there were then again cereals or wheat or whatever, mixed cultures, all small scale. And those landscapes, they also produced the vernacular forms, the vernacular landscapes. That's the landscape that grew on the basis of small scale human involvement in an unplanned way. Well, exactly the unplanned way. Now we are used to do landscape planning on the basis of landscape architecture because, well, the people who live in the towns don't know how a landscape functions anymore. So we should have at least the help of landscape planners and landscape architects. But well, the landscapes that we now value so much, they have been developed without any planning, without any design. The richness of traditions, of languages, of cultural heritage, of stories, songs, special markets, the local products, the cheese, but also the wine, I must say, the honey, local dishes, etc. That is the result of this landscape development. It's a crucial element of local identity and also of cultural tourism. In short, it are community-based landscapes. On the contrary, we now have globalization. If you see this picture, it is from Martin Jepsen and others. They made a picture of what land management regimes were valid across Europe from 1800 to 2010. Well, not knowing what was before, but before there were little maps to check, but probably there were also huge changes before, but maybe not so huge as in the period of 1800 to 2010. You can very clearly see the break of 1945 after the Second World War, when intensification started on the western side of Europe and collectivization on the eastern side. And you see that in some countries, it is a little bit later than in other countries, but in all countries, this intensification and industrialization took place. whereas after 1980, it was indicated that there was a lot of pressure also from the population, from the public to environmental values. And also the European Union, by the way, they took their share in it. So in 200 years, the whole land use and land management regime has changed. The landscapes, well, have remained more or less the same because, well, the landscape could not follow up with the space of industrialization. The traditional landscapes represent multiple layers of natural and cultural heritage that can hardly be accounted for by science and policy. So even if we would have wanted, it would hardly have been possible to develop the landscapes in such a rapid pace to well, the land use that was required to feed the people and to feed also the needs of the industrial stakeholders. A large part of the heritage is not being sustained by current land use, therefore. So the current land use is not in harmony, is not in balance with the landscape on which it is carried out. So the gradual or abrupt transformations that you have seen in the picture in the landscapes, but they are inevitable. It is inevitable that there are abrupt transformations. Landscape is often just a gadget for the privileged. Well, like the landscape paintings and also the landscape which is being kept for holiday resorts. But at the same time, it provides the subconscious identity to inhabitants. Often they don't know that it's their landscape that is part of their identity. But if you ask in an in-depth interview, what are their relations to the environment, then the landscape comes about as a crucial element. And of course, there are unintended side effects: degradation or vanishing of ancient field patterns and roads. Archaeological features disappearing, land management structures disappearing, like roads and waterways, farm buildings and watering systems that are not anymore functional. So they are bought by tourists, by urban people, or they just are derelict in a couple of years. The associated social systems and narratives are often degrading or getting lost as well. So just as an example, high nature value farmland lost by agriculture intensification from 2006 to 2012. It's already some time ago, but it is continuing. And you see that, well, the red is up to 4% per year. And if you count the years and it's 50 years, then, well, you've lost your high nature value farmland in the country, or in this case, in the NUTS region. And you see that in Central Europe, Czechia, Hungary, but also in the Baltics and in southern Spain, where there's a high amount of high nature value farmland being lost. Interestingly, this is a new picture. There is also high nature value farmland lost by agricultural extensification. And extensification, it was mainly land abandonment, but also transition from agricultural area into nature reserves. Well, as you can see in the Netherlands, it's at stake in the Netherlands. There's hardly any land abandonment, but there is a lot of traditional small-scale agricultural land is being converted into nature. But now the practices that characterize those high nature value farmlands are not being operated anymore. So this high nature value farmland lost. That is the effect of globalization, of our intensification of the production. And if you see this continuing to the future, then well, there is really a need to try to predict, or at least to foresee, what are the effects of the future developments. Are those developments continuing, or can we still steer a little bit? That was the objective of the Volante project, a European project, a couple of years ago already, where we try to identify the different pathways to images of the future land use, and based on a lot of interviews and a lot of workshops among stakeholders from low to high and from left to right, we identified that in fact almost everybody wants a sort of multifunctional landscape. Because that's a nice landscape, that's a beautiful landscape, that's a landscape where you can do the things that you want to do. There was hardly any voice that said we need big open fields and well, the great areas of wheat production or whatever. So we then decided to define 3 different alternatives of this multifunctional landscape, where the local multifunctional is the most intricate one. The regional connected is a little bit more open, where there is cooperation within the region, and then best land in Europe, which is also multifunctional, but a little bit more, say, market oriented. And what appeared is if you then, with sophisticated land use modeling, try to arrive at that sort of futures, the land use appears to be out of control. The current trends, well, we cannot leave the current trends apart. We started from the scenario boundary conditions of economic development, and then they can be low scenario for economic development. The current trends lead to a polarized land use characterized by land sparing. So highly efficient production-oriented spaces on the one side, small-scale peri-urban multifunctionality on the other side. The traditional family farm is really likely to disappear. I don't know in which countries you are, but look in Denmark, look in Holland, look in France. For big parts of France, the local traditional family farm is disappearing because, well, it is impossible to earn your money as a family. If you want to play a role in the European market. There are threats in uncontrolled land abandonment because part of the land is not suitable to produce such high amounts of food or other products. There is a biodiversity decrease. There is loss of ecosystem and landscape services. There is decline of rural livability. And this has been documented by a lot of research and also by the European Environmental Agency. And the strange thing is that we observed with our stakeholders who came from the same institutions, partly, stakeholders and civil society alike expressed a wish for a different future. They want a nice multifunctional land use. So we don't get what we want. We really don't get what we want. Probably our democracy is not in the position to steer the landscape development, or at least not to steer the land use development. There's market failure. Is landscape heritage a common good? The landscape values? But Harding, well, his conclusion was that there is a tragedy of the commons. Probably it cannot be in another way, because it is not of this time to keep all those small-scale agricultural plots, etc. If people, that's another saying, really care for the heritage, they should also be willing to pay for it. But if it's a common good, then you should not pay for it. In other words, heritage values serve the people. So some say that those served should take their responsibility in managing it properly. But who's responsible? The EU has no competence in landscape or spatial planning. And I said in the beginning of this lecture, that's probably also very good. But practically all policies of the EU do have direct consequences for landscape and heritage. The common agricultural policy, energy policy, the climate policy, transport, well, what have you. everything has direct consequences on the landscape, and that's exactly what the European Landscape Convention is claiming. All those countries that have signed and ratified the European Landscape Convention should check what are the consequences for landscape and heritage by all the other legislation and all the other policies. But in the end of the day, the benefits of landscape often don't arrive at the people that take care of it. And that's not only the case in mass tourism, like in Venice or in Amsterdam. It is also in the mass tourism plots where suddenly in 10 years' time, there's coming thousands and thousands and thousands of Chinese tourists. And of course, the Chinese tourists also deserve a nice landscape to visit, but perhaps not with thousands and thousands of a small village. Well, let's make a small detour. The Altai. You see in the circle, it's like almost in the middle of the continent of the Asian continent. In fact, the circle is a little bit higher because there is the capital of the Altai region in Russia. But the Altai region is in fact on the crossroads of the Kazakhstan, China, Mongolia, and Russia. And those people, you see a picture of it in the lower side. They have had to reinvent also their own culture, because they have been in the Russian, this is the Russian part, for 70 years under the Soviet reign. And when I was there one time, I asked them, well, what are the rules of thumb of the Altai? Because they are not a religious people in our sense of Christianity or whatever. They have a shamanic culture. And then they said, no, we don't have a religion, so don't talk about rules of thumb, because everyone is responsible for himself or for herself. But then they said, well, perhaps we do have rules of thumb. And one is, don't do anything that has no meaning. Don't do anything that has no meaning. And the guy who told me that, he said, well, like when I was a kid and I walked with my grandma to the meadow to get a cow back home in the afternoon, I just kicked a small stone, and then she kicked me on my knee with her stick. And I asked her, why do you do that? And she asked me, why do you kick that stone? And she said, well, if there's no meaning for it, don't kick that stone. It's just an example. The second rule of thumb was time. Don't do the things on the right time. If there is the time of harvesting, well, you can't go with tourists. If there is time of building your house, well, you don't do it in the time of harvesting. And the third rule is the rule of measure. Do everything in the right measure. So if you need to build a house, and one tree is enough, well, you don't cut 2 trees. You just take from nature exactly what you need from the nature and not more. And that's, of course, why the Altai people were not very popular in Soviet Union, because the Soviet guys said, well, but if you can have 1 cow, you can also have 5 cows, and you can have the milk, and then you can provide also the sovkhoz with the milk, with the other. And the Altai, they didn't understand. And of course, but they are now rediscovering the same rules, how important they are for maintaining the cultural heritage of their community. Just undertake actions that have meaning, take care of the right timing of everything to happen, and keep measure, never taking more than you need. And if you consider those rules, it's exactly opposite to the market orientation of our countries in the West. Perhaps we should learn from that. It is not because of lack of appreciation that people, inhabitants, tourists, and land managers alike don't bother about landscape heritage values. So conforming with the 3 rules, they should do it in a completely different way. But well, it's just self-evident that you go for tourists to invite them to your area, because you can earn some money from it. And if you're continuing, then you can earn a lot of money from it. But it is rather because of lacking awareness. It is really a matter of awareness raising, which we are involved with in our research community. Awareness of the entire chain of effects of land use change, including transport, including energy consumption, pollution, weathering and wearing, disruption of local communities, etc. That's a clear task for the research community in close cooperation with citizens' organizations and land managers. We last year we studied in Wageningen how we could base our research for land management and for land use planning a little bit more on landscape. Well, you all know of the term of nature-based solutions, and we thought, but we are not really happy with the nature-based solutions because, well, you can always claim that, well, there are some natural effects in your measures, and there is some natural logical relationships there, and then you have the nature-based solutions. We thought what we need is to include also the dimension of it, and also the dimension of the participation of the local people who have to develop their own identity for the future. And therefore you need to develop a vision, a landscape-based vision for land use transitions, where you can try to aim at the vision instead of using the chaos and getting back to relevance, which does not conform to the local situation and to the current situation. Landscape transition needs a boundary concept, like a sort of image of the future, an image of the future where you're heading for. And where there are different options to get there. Of course, you will never arrive exactly at the place where you're heading for. That's the traditional landscape planning paradox. But it can guarantee that you're not arriving at the place where you're really outside the boundaries of the vision that you have imagined. So the pathways towards the vision, leads through a boundary concept. And the boundary concept we have met before in this talk. The boundary concept in this Midden-Delfland example was exactly the target image of the people within each of those polder areas that they defined for themselves, and that they said, okay, we want to arrive at that target image of the landscape, and we now are going to adapt our land use towards the target image of our landscape. We want cows in the meadows in many of those polders, and the farmer, he should be able to earn his bread from his farm. But then, if he needs to put the cows in the meadow instead of in the stable, and that costs him a little bit more, we will arrange, and that's the whole community of this green area, helped, in fact, also by Rotterdam and by The Hague. We will help the farmer also financially with subsidies and what have you. A last remark, Corona. We've talked about Corona already because, that is the reason that we, in fact, have this lecture series. What we, in this SPOT project, what we discover, and we still have to collect the real empirical data behind it, it is really also a rediscovering of landscape values. Preliminary experiences show that mass tourism has stopped. So there is no mass tourism here. And many, many people are very, very happy with it. In Amsterdam, the center of Amsterdam will now being transformed into a living area. The mayor has completely changed the development strategy there. Quality tourism has decreased, but it had continued. There are special offers now developed for dedicated private tours all over the place. And there's more interest in local food and home cooking. Besides the toilet paper, there was really a deficiency in flour for cooking bread. There is a huge increase in domestic tourism last summer. I don't know how it is in your countries, but in the Netherlands, well, the traditional local domestic tourist places where people went for holidays, in former times, so to say, well, they've returned now, and they discovered, wow, this is really nice. There is an increase in use of second houses, and there is urban residents now really considering to move to the countryside, just leaving the city and all the trouble the city brings, and go to the countryside. If you can work on distance, well, you can do it from the countryside as well. So there are changes in appreciation of the landscape values. The people discover anew that landscape is something which gives a sort of satisfaction. And there are new communities developing, people that meet each other in the countryside and say, hey, you came from the town. Why do you do that? Well, let's set up some organization to help the farmers here. And there is really now a challenge to study these opportunities, to develop and discuss visions using landscape image as a boundary object. The cultural heritage paradox, it's preservation by development. Well, preservation needs putting a fence around it and then it will not survive anyway. And heritage is everywhere, also in everyday landscapes. Heritage is more about the future, in fact, than about the past, because for the past you cannot preserve it. And it will be a museum which is not a living past. So the challenge is really to think about how can I keep the past living for the future. But like we said, who is in charge of the landscape? How can we persuade the decision makers to invest in a more equitable, sustainable appreciation of the embedded natural and cultural heritage? Not that they have to do it, but they have to provide the boundary conditions for it. Inability of the market in managing inherent values in the landscape, that's for clear. That's for sure. Focus on rights of use, if we should promote, instead of property rights. And there's quite a lot of research going on to do that. The property rights are not the right way to organize our democracy in landscape development. Knowledge brokers challenge is there for the specialists and academics, and that's we, and for museum and landscape observatories. The power of examples. Don't wait for policies, just do it now. So, like I said in my abstract, is landscape just a worn carpet? No. On the basis of the past, new landscapes will develop, but we have to take responsibility. Market and policy will not give suitable directions. Let's make them follow. They have to follow the value of the landscape itself as appreciated and perceived by the people. The continent of cheese will possibly become a continent of new open communities, including residents of cities and villages, and including people from outside. People that are involved in their landscape because they have a vision of livability, in search of local products to provide new colors characterizing the future landscape. Let's develop visions for the future of land use to safeguard the continuity of the European landscape. And that is where the disciplines meet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bas, for that very stimulating. I mean, obviously, the vision you paint at times is quite depressing and sad and upsetting and worrying, but it's definitely a rallying cry. Can I ask Maura to turn on her microphone and maybe just say a few words in response? Yes. That will then start the conversation going. And just to remind everybody, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon there beside the participants that says chat. If you click on that, it gives you an opportunity to type a message in, and I'll have a look at those messages coming in and I'll relay them to Bas, and then we'll see how the conversation develops. So thank you, Maura.
Bas, thank you very, very much. In Ireland, we say Gormila Magat. That was absolutely a lovely presentation. And I think it rings so much in a lot of the work that we do in rural development, in rural engagement, in agricultural change. It just rings so much in that. And I think that in this time that we're in now, particularly, I think as lecturers, we get so caught up in delivering that we don't often get the chance to, I think, take on board. So I think from that point of view, I just really enjoyed listening to a lecture rather than having to give one. And it was just so uplifting, even though, Conor, you're right, there are some issues that you really wonder and scratch your head about where we're going. But at the same time, just some of the key things that I think I really enjoyed, and maybe you might comment further or somebody else might have some questions on. I think this idea that you started with the peatland reclamation in Holland, it rings so true for us here in Ireland. And we continuously go through this idea of peatland reclamation, re-wetting of our bogs, reclaiming the land of the bogs, the issues that the bogs have created for us here in Ireland. But not just the issues that they have created, but the culture, the history, the identity that our bogs have in Ireland and that the peatlands have in Ireland for us. And I think it's the culture and the identity. And as you started your lecture, you talked about conflict management. And I think this is one of the key areas that we need to consider when we're talking about peatland and the landscape of the peatland and the reclamation of the peatland in Ireland in particular and right across Europe. So conflict management, I suppose, is a key issue, I suppose, for not just maintaining our access to landscape, but also the way in which we need to consider reclamation of peatlands across Europe. So that was one of the areas that I thought was very, very interesting and rings true for us right across Europe. History, culture, your alignment to this idea of the landscape of cheese, this idea of the enterprise of cheese. I really liked this as well. And I think any kind of enterprise that we have across Europe, it really is successful because of its attachment to place. You have a huge attachment to place with cheeses, with any product that I think that is developed from the land. And I think the more successful the product is, the more attachment to place it actually has. And I think enterprise really now, this localism that's attached to enterprise and enterprise development, it has a huge attachment to place and it has a huge attachment to culture. And I don't think people can parachute into local areas and develop something without, I suppose, connecting themselves with the environment, connecting themselves with the landscape and having that product attachment, that place attachment that's hugely important. I love the idea, and now again, I suppose as geographers, we love maps anyway, but I loved the idea of your map and the idea of our changement through time. And I think 2000 really, maybe it was that millennium year that we decided we really needed to rethink our landscape. We really needed to rethink this idea of how important our landscape was to us. And I think that idea as well, that well-being, quality of life started to become something that we all needed to connect with. And we connected that through landscape. And again, the quality or the qualities of the areas per polder. I thought that was a lovely idea. Again, this huge attachment to place, this idea of retaining our culture, this idea of creating a tourism around our culture. And then I suppose shooting through your presentation, this idea of a sustainable tourism. It's something I think we are fighting with constantly. And I think going back to the 1980s, the 1990s, as we moved through, and again, you talked about this idea of productivism, multifunctionality of the landscape, and this idea of how this productivism that we saw post-World War, this productivism that we saw in the 1950s, the 1960s as a result of the policy, and the detrimental effects of that productivism that really led to huge issues with our biodiversity, with our environment, with our landscape. And that idea that we needed to question what we were using that from. And again, as you produce this idea of multifunctionality and what we have the environment for, but also what we should have the environment for, what we should be entitled to have the environment for. So definitely that questioning of tourism and that need to produce a sustainable tourism that's sustainable for the people who live within the environment, as well as for those visitors that you talked about as well. And I think you had some lovely quotes there that I really liked, that idea of, you know, I'm not sure, can I find them there? But you had some lovely quotes there about this idea of the landscape and the vernacular landscape and the unplanned landscape. That really is, I think, yes, the gadget for the privileged. I loved that quote that you had there. And I think that is exactly what we need to be very, very mindful of, that tourism is not just a gadget for the privileged. It really has to be a part of the culture and the identity of the people who live there. And tourism has to be a sustained tourism that really protects the landscape and protects it for the people that live there, not just for the tourism, that the tourists that visit. I don't want to go on too long because I'm sure that there are loads of questions. But again, Bas, I have so many questions myself. I have so many comments, but it really is, my comments and my questions are really just, I suppose, as a privilege to have listened to a lovely lecture that really raises so many questions in my head. And I think an excellent lecture is always results in so many questions and so many ponderings and comments in our head. And I think that's exactly what you gave. So on those notes, I will hand it over to anybody else who'd like to comment.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. If this is a reflection of the intention that I had, I think I succeeded at least a little bit in conveying a message that I hope we can sustain also through this year of the European Landscape Convention until the next October, where we have hope to have a larger conference on the future and the continuity of the European landscape. So thank you very much. I think judging from what you reflected to me, but at least a little bit I succeeded. Yes, thank you.
So thank you both. The floor is now open. There are no questions have come in. So just while we're waiting for those, if I just talk about a couple of things that struck me about what you said, Bas. You were saying, towards the end of your talk, you were setting up what are the kind of solutions. And I'm just looking at a really contemporary context right now against the backdrop of your comment of making the markets follow what are our values, because I thought an interesting thread running through what you were saying is that when people are surveyed, both stakeholders and civil society, as to what types of landscapes they want, they manifestly want the complete opposite of what we're actually offering them. And so somewhere along the way, there's a break in the dialogue there. But making the markets follow, of course, is really topical right now when we see so many of the huge corporations turning their backs on the Trump circus, and recognizing that there are values out there, and whether you think the banks have no values and they are simply kind of throwing their canoes in with the rushing tide of anti-populism, or whether they actually realize that there's a genuinely large kind of population across the globe of people who share the values that are contrary to what was on offer to us over the last 4 years in the United States. That, I think, is a very powerful message. And I think that it was really appropriate that you finished off your talk with a kind of reflection on what's happening in pandemic Europe. That's really important, because absolutely every single bullet point that you listed there resonates with the experience that I've had here in Ireland, and all my neighbours and friends are commenting on the same thing, and internationally as well. So I think that a crisis, in a sense, on both sides of the Atlantic, world crisis, has actually in a way, beginning to really change the way we're thinking about the world. And as you say, the very fact that we're doing our business now online, I think, is a very important factor in all of this, because it liberalizes our choices as well, in terms, for example, as you say, of where we can choose to live because of the capacity now to work from home. So with all that, where do you think the breakdown is actually happening? If this is what we want and this is what we're getting, where is it falling down?
Yeah, well, that's really the crucial question. I think we also have, but interestingly, but you've been talking about European landscape and about the UNISCAPE as a promoter of the European Landscape Convention in research and also education. So I think one of the most important points here is also that, of course, we need to research all those developments, all those appearances, all those phenomena of landscape change, and also of the attitude and the perception of the people. But I'm afraid that's not enough. We really have to educate also our students, our pupils, and also the officials, the officers of the European Commission. But because when we presented the results of our study, the Volante study, where we said, well, we don't get what we want, they said, wow, maybe you're right. And then they started thinking. And then, of course, we could ask them, but also, so for you, what would be the solution? Oh, whoa, wait. Well, I'm not responsible for transport. I'm responsible for a small part of agriculture or whatever. And they said, well, it is just impossible. It's just impossible to change. So we also have to convey the knowledge of how you could integrate more the different knowledges, the different disciplines, and the different values. So that they can see sort of light in the end of the tunnel for their own sake, because they were agreeing with the conclusions that they also do not get the result that they want. They are working, well, they are really enthusiastic and dedicated to their work in the European Commission. I don't doubt, but it's just impossible. So, well, that's part of my answer, but I think we have to work together for that. So
the breakdown is happening somewhere between the knowledge generated by research and the policies.
Yep.
Somehow or other, we're not following through. So that actually speaks to some of the projects I know that you yourself are involved in, and more as well. The floor is open, and I think at this stage, if you want to ask a question, probably the best thing is just switch on your mic.
Well, that is Francesca Passetti Bambordella who opened the floor. But you're still mute.
Turn on your mic there.
Yeah, I hear something.
Francesca? No. Francesca, can we hear you? You have to turn on your mic. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hear you now, yes.
Okay. Sorry, but it depends on the Zoom. Sometimes it always has. Most of you don't know me. I am working with transhumans, and I'm with pastoralism. So just making a short presentation. So I really was very, very interested by this presentation, and I'm a little bit sad to see that your idea is quite pessimistic. Of course, well, I'm a biologist and ecologist, and I'm very aware about biodiversity going down. we are actually working on making transhumance world UNESCO heritage.
Nice.
So for the countries of Spain, Greece, and Austria, it was last year, and now we are with France and Spain being the leaders, preparing the documents to present it for other 8 countries. This on one side. On the other side, I don't know if some of you know about the proposition of United Nations to make 2026 the year of rangelands and pastoralism. And for that, we are organizing now, of course, everybody on voluntary basis. We are divided in several regions, yeah, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Europe, Arctic. And if some of you might be interested, I think it could be very, very interesting. We are between now and 26, there are several years, and this is the way to make awareness about the importance of pastoralism and rangelands worldwide. So I think the collaboration with some of you, I don't know anybody of you, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to know that this exists. And I think a collaboration with you would be really, with you universities, I don't know which universities you are, apart the 2 or 3 that have been presented now. I know there is Italy, I know now there is Wageningen and perhaps and Ireland, but well, I think crossing Europe, it can be really, really very interesting, and perhaps some of you can participate in let know about the importance of rangelands and pastoralism in your respective countries.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is...
If you want, I can send by email. You have my email, of course, because so I entered. I can send some material, and those who are interested to participate in this, of course, you are welcome. We are creating now the Europe. It's just it came out through FAO, the COAG, now the group of agriculture in September, and it wants to be presented to United Nations General Assembly of this year, and we are all working. Probably it will pass, so that the year 2026 will be the year of rangeland and pastoral. And I think it enters in maintaining the landscapes, and but not only the landscape, but all the biodiversity. I will not make a course on the importance of pastoralism for biodiversity, how you say, increasing or maintaining.
Well, thank you very much, Francesca. But this is really a big personal interest of mine, so I would be really happy to keep the contact and to follow what
if I can have your email, I'm willing to send you, of course, this. And I've seen you have worked in the montados, in the dehesas. I am half Italian, half German, but I'm working with Spain. I lived 31 years in Spain, and all the transhumance and pastoralism mainly in southern countries. And there is really a lot to maintain, and it's very, very urgent. Because what you said about families, family farming is going down. The European rules or development of, I'm the daughter of Europe, so I believe in Europe. I grew up in Luxembourg, so I really believe in Europe. But there have been made a lot of mistakes, mainly in the southern countries, because as you know, for the montados or the dehesas, the EU doesn't consider pasture when there are more than X trees.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the southern countries, it's a must that there are more trees, because in the summer you wouldn't have animals, but you would have some steaks instead, and so on and so on. So I think the collaboration with you as landscape experts can be really, really very exciting and positive.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we can develop this cooperation. If you, I will ask Tommaso, the host of this meeting, for your address, and then we will.
I can put it now in the chat, so you have it.
Perfect, even better.
Thank you, Francesca. While she's putting her email in the chat, are there any other comments from anybody else? Thank you, Francesca. I can see that now.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'll come in with a corner here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bas, for that. Hi, I'm Andrew Butler, and I'm based in the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala. And I was really interested when you started talking about Sami. I've started working with studies into the Sami recently, and just understanding or not understanding their understanding of landscape is really interesting. That you have to rethink what landscape is. For them, landscape is more of a verb than a noun. In fact, they don't actually use the term landscape. They use a term called miaci. And you have to know their practices to be able to understand what landscape means to them. And I mean, it's just a really extreme example of us not really understanding what other people mean when they talk about landscape, which I think is an issue even for us here. I mean, this is a community that isn't agricultural based in the way that we think. They don't work with the seasons the same way that traditional agriculture does. It's transporting the reindeer over long distances, which is being crimped down more and more due to forestry and many factors. But I constantly see that this is a bit of an issue when we talk about landscape, that we don't really know what we're talking about with each other. So I just wonder if you'd reflect on that a bit.
No, thank you very much. But I've been a couple of times in Samiland, and it was really like a sort of opening of a new world for me, because I thought also that I knew a little bit, just of the different landscapes of Europe. I've been traveling a lot across Europe, but then I discovered, no, this is something completely different. I would need to live for a year at least in their community to understand a little bit of their landscape. On the other side, Europe is also the European Landscape Convention is not a World Landscape Convention, and that's by purpose, because there is something common in the European landscape and in the perception of the European landscape from different people, and that's first of all is the diversity, but we recognize that this is, in a way, it is European, and this is different from other continents. And this is also a difficulty, because it could lead to some Europeanization in the bad sense of the word. It could be a sort of new colonialism. Well, our landscapes are the best of the world, and of course this is not our intention. But there's always also with landscape something connected of. My landscape is the best landscape, of course, because it's my identity, and that's why I think it's very important to have this sort of deep democracy type of considerations on landscape, getting into a compromise instead of having a debate on what is better and what is worse. If you start talking with each other and try to understand what is the background of the other person, like the Sami or a Greek olive yard owner, then you start understanding him or her in a way that's completely beyond a sort of opposition or a conflict of interests. It's like understanding the world of the other, so that together you can get further towards a future that you both would appreciate. Yeah.
Could I come in there, Bas, and just say, slightly contrary to what you're saying, is the great strength of the definition of landscape in the European Landscape Convention is that landscape is an area as perceived by people. So in that sense, it's not prescriptive, it's not nationally orientated. It's actually, to my mind, it speaks to the phenomenological roots of landscape theory. And so it allows all people and all landscapes, where landscape is the product of the human encounter with, the world. The landscape is both the function of it and the artifact of it. And so I think that the definition actually works. I blow hot and cold, I think most people do, about the definition that's in it. It's very short. It seems to be too short to be possible to capture something as rich as landscape. But by the same token, I think there's real strength in that one phrase that you quoted towards the start of your lecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing coming back to Sami again is that it just made me have to rethink, because there's less focus on the area and more on the activity, rather than, I think, how we often I think most people in Europe think of landscape is a place where activities occur, whereas for them it's an activity and it occurs in a place, which is, it's really interesting. It really makes you have to recalibrate what landscape can be.
Yeah, well, you have the famous story of Yves Michelin. He told me one time, he asked his students to survey the perception of the people in the Massif Central about the landscape. And the students came back and they didn't find out really, because they didn't know what landscape is. And so one of the students, he said at a certain moment, okay, I find another solution. I asked the guy, a farmer, so when you wake up in the morning and you do aside the curtains, what do you see? And he said, a lot of work to do. And that's exactly what you say, Andrew. Landscape is a verb rather than a status quo. And that's also how we would need to envision the future of the European landscape.
I think that's a very elegant place to end this evening's proceedings. I don't know where everybody is, but where I am, it's now 6:02 in the evening. It's already dark. I want, on behalf of everyone, to thank you so much, Bas, for that very stimulating start. You touched on issues that are, they're of immediate and urgent importance. They speak to every aspect of what we think about landscape, both the past and the future. And although, as we've said, there are aspects of it that are alarming and maybe pessimistic, I think ultimately running through your work in this evening's lecture is optimism. It's one thing that I feel always characterizes Bas. For those of you who don't know who are, and for those of you who do, it's, absolutely in your DNA to be optimistic and enthusiastic about landscape. And that came through very strongly in your talk this evening. So I want to thank you for that. To everybody else, thank you very much for participating. We will notify you in a couple of weeks' time of the next of the lectures, and be sure to spread the word around. I see your nice messages coming in along the side there, so you're all very welcome, and do spread the message, the word about this series. The more, the merrier. We're delighted to have seen you this evening, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening and a safe onward journey. Thank you, Bas.
Okay, well, looking forward to the continuation of this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you.